Let me, Frank, show you the kind of verbal onslaught that the men and women of the FBI have endured. And we have no reason to believe this will abate. But this is how Trump's allies describe the court-approved search of Mar-a-Lago.
This is Gestapo crap, and it will not stand.
The idea that you're an FBI agent and you're given this warrant to serve against President Trump that you know is spurious, that is a hatchet job, that is Gestapo Stasi tactics.
They raided our president's home. There is no going back from this, everybody.
Again, none of those statements are rooted in fact. The FBI workforce doesn't have the ability to set the record straight, or chose not to. I suppose they could have if they wanted to, but every person seems to overlearn the lessons of the last person Trump fired. And so Chris Wray was maybe infamously or famously mum, only spoke when under oath up on Capitol Hill, and did defend the Bureau's mission. But those attacks are against not Chris Wray specifically or singularly, but against the workforce. And I wonder how the FBI rank and file are feeling today, Frank, if you've heard from any of them.
Oh, I have. Yes, I have. First, let me share with you that just this week, 2 assistant directors have announced their retirements. They were eligible for retirement, but they weren't mandatory. They didn't have to go, but they're going. And the private sector security world will be much better for having them. But the resumes are all out there, particularly at headquarters and the executive ranks. But the field now is rather nervous. They're wondering if this is going, they're hoping this isn't going to, these changes, this craziness isn't going to affect case openings and case closings in the field. Somehow, magically, the U.S. attorneys that Trump will appoint throughout the United States will somehow be really nice people who are loyal to the Constitution and the rule of law. I hope they're right. I fear that they're wrong. And I think the changes we've heard today are just the beginning. The guardrails aren't there. That people think, oh, there's all kinds of laws that will prevent illegal spying and wiretapping. No, not really. No, there are Attorney General guidelines. Many of them came out of the Church Committee after J. Edgar Hoover's abuses. But we just learned this week, Nicole, of a DOJ IG report that says that during the first Trump term, they inappropriately obtained the records of 2 sitting members of Congress and 43 staffers. And guess who else? Kash Patel. So, and they did it wrong. They did it inappropriately. They didn't follow the rules. So, yeah, he did it before. He'll do it again in droves. And one last thing, and I'm sure I'll go just keep going later. Kash Patel, the nominee to replace Wray, had to be granted criminal immunity by the Department of Justice so that he would talk about the Mar-a-Lago documents case. I'm not sure he's going to pass the FBI background investigation.
Well, you bring us, Frank, to John Bolton's warning today in the Wall Street Journal. Let me read more from that to you, Mary McCord. John Bolton writing this, quote, in neither case was he in charge of a directorate during my tenure as National Security Advisor or thereafter, as he contends in his memoir and elsewhere. He reported to senior directors in both cases and had defined responsibilities. His puffery was characteristic of the resume inflation we had detected when Trump pressed him on us. We found he had exaggerated his role in cases he worked on as a Justice Department lawyer before joining Mr. Nunes's committee staff. Given the sensitivity of the NSC's responsibilities, problems of credibility or reliability would ordinarily disqualify any job applicant. And Mary, let me just, so this doesn't ever look like a single sort of conflict between 2 former Trump national security officials, let me show you what former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, also one of Trump's former national security officials, had to say about Kash Patel.
We were trying to rescue an American in West Africa who had been captured by, we believe, terrorists and whose life was in danger. So we sent our special operators abroad to rescue that person. They were in the air. We had launched them. I had launched them on the premise that we had airspace clearance into that country. to conduct the operation. It was information given by allegedly Kash Patel to Tony Tata, who was worked for me in OSD policy. And we found out hours later, as we were about to cross into that territory, that it was not true, that the State Department had not got that clearance. And so for a moment in time there, at least an hour, it jeopardized the mission.
Mary, your reaction to all of this?
Well, that's such a concrete example, right, of the danger. I have no personal knowledge of that incident, but just taking the former defense secretary at his word, think about the ramifications. You have somebody who our allies abroad very well may not trust because of that incident, and of course, because of other things, such as his claims that Donald Trump engaged in massive declassification of some of the highest level national security information, classified information just before his departure from office, something that I think most people don't believe is true and was contested by others within the White House, including the White House counsel's office. But even if it had been true, that's how carelessly he felt about national security secrets, sources and methods, relationships with our allies, our nuclear weapons program. Those are things that he cavalierly suggested Donald Trump had used mental telepathy to declassify. So I think the former defense secretary's comments, as well as John Bolton's comments, should really cause a whole lot of concern among not only the American public, but the members of the Senate, whose responsibility is to confirm the president's nominee for FBI director. And I would like to reflect back on the 1970s, the Senate Judiciary Committee that engaged in the hearings that resulted in the passage of this 10-year non-renewable tenure for the FBI director. There were two goals, and both went toward there never, ever being a partisan FBI director who was part of just the president's own, personal entourage, if you will. The two goals were to insulate the FBI director through that non-renewable term from political pressure by the president or senior officials in the executive branch, eliminate any motive to curry favor for maybe a second appointment or another term, and secondly, to prevent the FBI director from becoming too independent, too non-responsive, too powerful, as many said that believed that Director Hoover had become. So those things are those goals are completely undermined by not only Director Wray capitulating and resigning before he is forced out of that position. And I do respect the director. I just disagree, as do your other guests today, Frank and John, that was the right thing to do, and also would be completely undermined by the president appointing somebody like Kash Patel and by the Senate confirming someone like him. The Senate has to take this extremely seriously.
Michael Steele, I'll let you answer whether or not you think they will.
Probably not. I think there's nervousness about challenging Donald Trump beyond Matt Gaetz. There's going to be a lot of hand-wringing and a lot of, let me, take close account of what, the nominee has said about this, if they're Kash Patel or that, if they're, someone else. And the reality of it is, the Senate probably doesn't want to exercise its independent constitutional responsibilities of advise and consent and say to the president, which they should be saying now, not waiting until you get to the inauguration, not waiting until you get into the process of actually having the hearings, but saying now to the president, Mr. President, we got you. You're a man. We love you, but you can't send us anything like this. So we're going to advise you not to do this. And so we're not going to consent on these three, Gabby, Tulsi Gabbard, and Kash Patel, and Seth Hegseth, but send us someone that we can pass with no noise and no drama. Trump's not going to do that because he wants the noise, he wants the drama, he loves the conflict, and he wants to test just how loyal you are. And that's the thing, Nicole. Every day is another test of loyalty. That's the thread that runs through all of this. Every day is another test. every moment is another opportunity for Donald Trump to hear you say something, not respond the way he thinks you should, or even look funny on TV, right? And for him to go, you know what, just not feeling that person anymore. And so they're more concerned about that than they are the very things that we've heard from, our guests here today in terms of what this moment means. I agree. Director Wray should not have resigned. He should have stayed in the job and said, fire me, because I'm going to stand as a guard at the portal for the men and women who serve in this building and around the country. And we're not the personal puppets of that serve at the whims of a particular president or a particular presidential nominee. But what we've seen, last point, is this has been a very interesting transition from my perspective, because I've watched official Washington, including this White House, treat Trump as if he's already president.
Yes. Yeah.
He's off doing foreign trips. Mm-hmm. He's having meetings. And Joe Biden is just sitting there in the White House or in Delaware or whatever, putting out here that or the other thing. Or when he does engage, as we saw with the Syria episode this weekend, it's like, okay, so what does Donald Trump think? And so this is the problem, that we've now gotten to a point where we just embrace all of this as just normal Trump stuff. We're back in this world again 4 years later, and here we are.
It's the opposite of how President Obama governed between Election Day in 2016 and Donald Trump's first inauguration in 2017.
Joining me now is Ruth Ben-Ghiat, history professor at New York University, and conservative attorney George Conway, contributor to The Atlantic and president of the Society for the Rule of Law. Thank you both for being here. George, I do want to start with you about Christopher Wray. Okay. Because there is a saying among those who want to fight autocracy, do not comply in advance. Yep. Today, Christopher Wray, who holds the same job J. Edgar Hoover used to have, but J. Edgar Hoover used to make presidents fear him. Yep. Christopher Wray clearly fears Trump and stepped down. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I wish he had not done that. I wish Christopher Wray had not done that, precisely for the reason that you say. I mean, Professor Snyder's great quote from his book on tyranny, don't obey in advance. And I wish, he should, I wish it would be my preference for Wray to have stayed and gotten fired so that we could all point out, and it would illustrate how extraordinary this situation is, where the president of the United States, who is a convicted criminal and who has been indicted on federal charges, is firing the FBI director for the stated reason that the FBI director conducted a search based on probable cause found by a United States district judge to search for stolen, secret, classified documents that he hid from the FBI and lied about. Yeah. And then, lo and behold, the documents were right where the search warrant said they were. So this seems a bit, it's me. It's all about Trump. Yes, he has the lawful power to fire the FBI director, but let's see him do it, and let's have him explain that it was all about him and the fact that he committed a crime and he got called out on it.
Yeah, I mean, and Ruth, the impact of this, I would guess, I'm not in the FBI, but I would guess that if you're a field agent that got some intel that Donald Trump stole more classified documents, or you found out that he was planning another attack on the Capitol, or planning to do some other crime, you're going to be a little wary to try to execute that kind of a search, to try to do your job. This literally, to me, opens the door for Donald Trump to steal whatever classified documents he wants. Who's going to check him, boo? To do whatever illegal crime. I mean, he should be in even more trouble. He's just getting away with it because he's president-elect. But now I cannot imagine any future FBI director, let alone Kash Patel, ever investigating him for anything.
Yeah, that's the chilling effect of being in advance and his bullying. And it's unfortunate that I agree with George. It's unfortunate that he is Director Wray is resigning, but also the language he used. He said he's doing it so the department doesn't get dragged further into the fray. But the FBI didn't create the fray. They were simply trying to enforce the law because Donald Trump had, classified documents in his home, because authoritarians don't recognize any boundaries between public and private. So the mess or the fray was created by Donald Trump in doing those illegal things. And yet Director Wray, it's as though they made the problem, and that's exactly where Trump wants him to be.
Yeah, I mean, there's a saying that Napoleon Bonaparte used to say, "L'état c'est moi." I am the state, right? So whatever I do is, and Nixon used to do it. His term was, if the president does it, it's not a crime. So now what we have is essentially a reverse J. Edgar Hoover, where essentially Donald Trump controls the new FBI director, who's going to be Kash Patel. He's going to get through, I'm sure. And people, let me just let you listen to some of the things that that Susan Collins has said. Susan Collins is, she's already ready to put in the guy that Donald Trump wants for whatever position. Here's what she said back in the day. She wants to put in Hegseth, apparently. Brett Kavanaugh, back in the day, this is Susan Collins' assurance that there would be no overturning of Roe v. Wade. Roe is settled law, Kavanaugh tells Collins. Democrats aren't moved. Collins calls draft of Roe opinion completely inconsistent with what Gorsuch and Kavanaugh said during hearings. So these senators are willfully ignorant. They're trying to pretend that Donald Trump is promising that everything is going to be fine and Hegseth is not going to drink anymore and everything is going to be good. They want to be fooled.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's who they are. I mean, we've seen this movie before. I mean, this isn't the first time where Tuberville, I mean, he needs a playbook with diagrams of the Constitution. Maybe that's what he'll understand.
Picture book.
Picture book, yes. But, the senators have an obligation to exercise independent judgment. And here you're basically having senators ready to abdicate that role. And there's nothing surprising about this because we've seen it before. I mean, it's what we saw 2 impeachment trials where the man was unquestionably guilty and they didn't even consider it. Most of them didn't even consider convicting.
And Mitt Romney said some of them because they were afraid for their own lives. I mean, and the thing is, if the idea is that the Supreme Court will save us, don't count on it. This is the Supreme Court. They sided with Trump on whether Trump can use the Pentagon, Ruth, for the border wall, which is not what he's allowed to do. It's supposed to be Congress appropriating that money. He won on whether the Supreme Court can institute a travel ban against Muslim countries. Here's what John Roberts said. That if you didn't, in Trump versus the United States, this was part of his ruling, the president would be chilled from taking bold and unhesitating action required of an independent executive to ensure that he can undertake the especially sensitive duties of his office with bold and unhesitating action. He repeated bold and unhesitating action over and over and over again, Ruth, because even the Supreme Court agrees that the president must be a king. Otherwise, it destroys the presidency itself. So if you've got the Senate collapsing, the House obviously is going to do whatever he wants, and the Supreme Court won't help us. We're out of gas.
Yeah, that's one of the definition, the core definition of authoritarianism is that the executive overwhelms the other branches of government and all checks on the power and situation of the president or the head of state are removed. And it's even, Senator Tuberville is, again, attentive to language when he says that the people of Alabama gave him a mandate and that was to do whatever, Donald Trump wants. That's kind of abdicating. I thought the people who voted for him actually want him to govern down, take care of his constituency, take care of their needs. Instead, everything must rotate around Donald Trump. And this is actually something called personalist rule. It's a type of authoritarian when you have a very strong one person. This is all of my strongmen in my book. And the purpose of the party and ultimately government is to solve the legal and financial and other problems of the leader. And so everybody becomes a personal tool of the leader. And that's what is happening now. Everybody's folding to his will.
And by the way, the state of New York is not going to let him get away with that 500. He owes that money, right? And so that's the ones he can't get away from. But he's going to be able to grift the hell out of the presidency because everyone around him is going to be feeding him money.
Right. And and they know that they're not going to be subject to federal prosecution because the Attorney General of the United States is going to look the other way whenever a story comes out on MSNBC or CNN or the New York Times or ProPublica about somebody grifting off the administration and profiting on the government. So I think it's going to be, it's going to be a lot for people out there, journalists, to call out the corruption. And that's one of the things I think that people miss about the authoritarian label that is well expressed in Ruth's book, Strongmen. It's like we may not see jackbooted thugs on the streets at this point. All right, maybe with the immigrants.
With immigrants and anti-Palestinian
what
protesters.
we will see is the first thing that you see in any kind of regime that's run by a narcissistic sociopath who only cares about himself and advancing his own power is corruption.
Yeah.
The corruption is going to make our heads spin, and that's the most important thing to focus on in the first instance.
Yeah, absolutely. Indeed. And Ruth, just to give you a sense of who Donald Trump is chatting with, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban tweeted about his visit with Trump, saying the future has begun. Donald Trump hosting Tucker Carlson, Kid Rock, and Mike Flynn, General Mike Flynn, who previously lied to the FBI, Mel Gibson, Russell Brown, Roger Stone, all in attendance, giving them awards at Mar-a-Lago. He's gathering around him people who are QAnon affiliated. He's surrounding himself with these people, and they're going to be able to also continue to grift, to make money, and as long as they stay associated with the dear leader.
Yeah, and these are very radical people. I mean, General Flynn is a hub of QAnon and Christian nationalism. Roger Stone has decades he used to work as a lobbyist for dictators. These are people who have a long experience with destroying the truth, destroying professionalism, and any kind of boundaries between public and private for the leader, any kind of democratic notions of accountability and transparency. Some of them have been working on this project a very long time, so I'm not surprised they're there celebrating now.
Yeah, they're going to be feasting on the American economy, and ordinary people, I think, are going to be very surprised at how little they get out of this whole deal. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, and including some people who voted for Trump. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, George Conway, thank you very much. Oh, wait, you've got props. You did. It says, "Don't blame me. I voted for sanity." Yep. That's what our friend George brought us today. He brought me one as well. We're going to send you yours, Ruth. Thank you both very much.
The abrupt resignation of FBI Director Chris Wray was a result of an immense pressure campaign by Donald Trump and his allies. And that push to force Wray out is part of a larger effort to undo half a century of institutional reforms to the FBI passed in the wake of Watergate and the decades-long reign of J. Edgar Hoover. Donald Trump wants his choice for FBI Director Kash Patel to wield the authority of the Bureau against his perceived enemies, much in the way that Hoover did during his tenure. But, as my next guest writes, Patel views the FBI very differently from Hoover, and he is promising a crusade not just against Trump's critics, but against the Bureau itself. Hoover used to describe the Bureau as the one bulwark against a hidden left-wing conspiracy that penetrated all corners of American life. In Patel's world, the FBI is the conspiracy. Beverly Gage is a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and author of G-Man, J. Edgar Hoover and the Making of the American Century. She also has a new piece in the New Yorker today asking, how would Kash Patel compare to J. Edgar Hoover? Professor, it's great to have you. I am really enjoying your book, which is just a masterful, masterful piece of work, so thank you for writing it. As someone who wrote a biography of J. Edgar Hoover and who's watching all this unfold, your reaction to Wray's announcement today and what it means for the Bureau?
Well, I'm sorry the book is so relevant at the moment, but I think Wray's resignation is a real sign that the Bureau is in trouble. Hoover had lots of faults, but he believed in the Bureau, and he actually mostly tried to insulate it from political pressure that he didn't like. And here we're just seeing kind of naked announcements that the Bureau is going to be used as a political weapon.
Yeah, you write this. Hoover, for all his faults and abuses of power, was nevertheless an institution builder. He believed in the FBI's nonpartisan independence. Patel's chief goal, by contrast, is to weaponize the FBI as a partisan force to protect Trump and wreak vengeance on his administration's enemies. If such naked politicization happens to undermine public faith in the FBI, so much the better. The big difference here is Hoover ran the FBI as kind of fiefdom, where his own ideological axes to grind, petty grievances, wherever. It was a vector for that. It was not a vector for the president in power. In fact, sometimes it was deployed against them. How different would it be to have an FBI basically acting in a Hooverite fashion, but on behalf of the guy in the White House?
Hoover served under 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans. So he was, for all of his faults, a sort of legitimately nonpartisan figure. And of course, the critique when he died, he was there for 48 years, was that the Bureau had become too independent. It was too insulated. In fact, that, the FBI director was more powerful than the president. So I don't think we want to go back to the era of J. Edgar Hoover, but in the circumstance we're in now, I think you can see some of the virtues in that kind of independence and the ability to be insulated from this kind of really direct, bald political pressure.
You make this really important point that I think it's worth us lingering on for a moment. Obviously, there are constitutional checks on abuses of power through, those rights secured in the Constitution, and judges and approving warrants and things like that. Now, those can sometimes be flimsy in the real world, but they exist. You make the point that the worst abuses, you say the worst abuses of FBI power have usually come through its intelligence and surveillance operations. Making a criminal case in court is hard. There are laws and procedures and evidentiary standards. Intelligence investigations operate in a more nebulous realm. Tell me more about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the FBI is this funny kind of hybrid organization where, on the one hand, they're a law enforcement agency, but we've also made them into our domestic intelligence agency. And certainly during Hoover's day, it was the intelligence side where almost all of the abuses occurred, in part because, intelligence doesn't have quite the same kind of evidentiary standards. Often you're not trying to make a case in court. You're just trying to kind of get dirt on people, figure out what's going on. And, at various points, the FBI can use wiretaps and bugs and even infiltration of political organizations if they deem that they are somehow dangerous enough. And so it's a very powerful set of tools. There are some restrictions on it, but, this is a big, secretive bureaucracy. And in the hands of the wrong people, even that power of investigation and surveillance and information gathering can be really powerful and dangerous.
What would you ask a senator who came to you, having read your book, and was preparing, say, for a hearing of the nominee, Kash Patel, trying to think through what are questions or concerns they should be airing and focusing on?
Well, I think one of the things that he could think about is really just whether Kash Patel knows how to run a bureaucracy. I mean, I think one of the things that is alarming about Patel is not only this idea that he's going to weaponize the Bureau, but that he kind of wants to come in with a wrecking ball and in some ways destroy certainly the upper echelons of the institution itself. So he professes to be a great ally of the rank and file, but he wants to destroy, shut down, get rid of the D.C. headquarters. And that's just a very strange thing to think about, a massive law enforcement and intelligence bureaucracy operating without a headquarters. So there are lots of political questions to ask. There are lots of questions about, respect for law. But there's also a question of, does he actually want the FBI to be a functioning organization or not?
Beverly Gage, thank you very much for your time tonight.
NBC's Julie Sirkin is joining us now from Capitol Hill, and also with us, Jeff Mason, White House correspondent for Reuters. Julie, what's the lay of the land there today? Is Hegseth winning over skeptics?
Well, not yet he isn't, and that is why he's continuing to meet. Let's face it, this is really a gender divide that is emerging among Senate Republicans. He's continuing to try and make his case specifically to those Senate Republican women. Again, not all of them, of course, this group is not a monolith, but those really seem to be the Senate Republicans that care the most about those sexual misconduct and assault allegations that Hegseth and his lawyer had repeatedly denied. These are the Senate Republicans who are perhaps being a little bit more outspoken in their consternation, saying publicly that perhaps they need more information from Hegseth before they actually commit to backing him. You mentioned his meeting with Senator Lisa Murkowski yesterday. Having covered her for years, I can tell you that this is somebody who does not say something unless they feel like what they're saying is what they truly believe and how they will act moving forward. It is telling that, pressed repeatedly by my colleagues here on Capitol Hill, all she said was that it was a good meeting with Mr. Hegseth. In about a couple minutes from now, about 20 minutes from now, he is set to meet with Susan Collins of Maine. She is somebody who is very close to Lisa Murkowski. The two have broken before, but often they kind of go in the grain together. They often cast similar votes. They sit next to each other in the Senate chamber floor. And so this is going to be really telling. Collins is somebody who is telling reporters up here, telling local reporters in Maine, that she does find the sexual misconduct and assault allegations very troubling. Also, of course, his potential drinking, his alcoholism. So all of this is just still the very beginning of the process for Hegseth. I think he got just about how much he's going to get from President-elect Trump in terms of an endorsement telling him to keep going. The rest of the work really is cut out for Hegseth and Hegseth alone.
Julie, thank you. So, Jeff, let's talk a little bit about the pressure campaign we're seeing from Trump and some of his allies to try to get these Republican senators to come on board. Just take Joni Ernst, for example, when she had come out and expressed maybe some hesitation about Hegseth. You saw Donald Trump Jr. go after her, saying maybe you're in the wrong political party. Also, a popular Iowa conservative talk show host said he was ready to challenge her in 2026 in the primary. Iowa's own attorney general came out with an op-ed, also with a not so subtle message to try to urge Ernst to support Trump's picks. Now, it's important to note it's been over 10 years since an incumbent elected senator has lost a primary, but could these threats be effective, this pressure campaign?
Well, it's certainly a sign, I think, A, of how much they do want Hegseth on the Trump side, the fact that they're willing to unleash that, and two, they're unleashing it, to use that verb again. And I think that's also a sign for senators like Joni Ernst and others about what awaits them if they defy Trump. And I think that'll be a test, not only for this particular nomination moment, but also for how they deal with the president when he's in office again.
It's not just Hegseth also facing some heat on the Hill, but let's take a look at Director of National Intelligence pick Tulsi Gabbard, who's also in meetings right now with senators. Reporters asked her just yesterday whether she views Russia as a U.S. adversary. They also asked her about her meetings, her conversations, her visit to Syria to meet with Assad, and she stonewalled. Here it is.
Do you believe Russia is a primary adversary? Has your trip to Syria come up at all in your meetings?
How important is it for her to answer those questions?
Well, I think that certainly there's only one answer that most senators in the U.S. Senate will be looking for. And if they ask her that and she stonewalls then that'll be even more significant. Not speaking to reporters in the hallway is upsetting to us as reporters, but maybe not as big of a deal.
But it also seems like it should be an easy question to answer.
100%. It should be an easy question to answer. And I would also add to that the fact that the developments in Syria are happening this week puts that even more in a spotlight. The fact that she's had this history of having gone to Syria before and having met with Assad, who is now, of course, no longer the leader.
Donald Trump is still making announcements of people he wants to serve in his next administration, including just yesterday announcing Kimberly Guilfoyle, Don Jr.'s fiance, as his pick to be ambassador to Greece. What kind of experience does she have for this role?
She has experience fundraising for Donald Trump and being close to him, and that's apparently the criteria that was most important to him.
And don't forget, also former Fox News contributor.
Exactly. There's a theme here. I mean, you've got a former Fox anchor in line to become the next defense secretary. The president-elect is absolutely rewarding people who have been his supporters in his family circle, in the TV circle that is an important universe to him, and among donors and others.
Jeff Mason, good to see you. Thank you very much for coming on.
Turning to Kash Patel, he is, of course, Trump's pick to head the FBI. He was back on the Hill yesterday for a second straight day of meetings. Patel met with key Republican senators Thom Tillis, Lindsey Graham, and Mike Lee. All three have signaled they will support Patel's nomination. Senator Graham posted this photo on social media after the meeting, endorsing Patel's nomination, writing, Kash promised to get the FBI back on its original mission of protecting America, and that the days of the FBI leadership having their thumb on the scale politically will be over.
Is there anything in there about him saying he was going to arrest members of the press?
Nothing.
Because they didn't support the Stop the Steal conspiracy theory?
And put the shoe on the other foot. Can you imagine if Joe Biden or Barack Obama or someone else had nominated someone who said we're going to arrest members of the media at Fox News or Newsmax or Democrats? Please.
Locusts descending from the sky.
We know exactly what would happen. Former Congressman Tulsi Gabbard also continued her Senate meeting yesterday. Trump's choice to be Director of National Intelligence had scheduled visits with Senators Tom Cotton and Jim Risch, along with Senator-elect Bernie Moreno. Some of the concerns about Gabbard due to a secret meeting she had in 2017 with Syria's now deposed president, Bashar al-Assad. Senator-elect Moreno brushed that off, telling reporters after his meeting, Gabbard said she, quote, serves at the pleasure of the president. So this is ultimately President Trump's foreign policy, not any one member.
No advice and consent anymore? Is that what he's saying?
That's what a lot of them are saying.
Could we get him a Constitution to read? I know he's new to the Senate, but maybe he should read the Constitution. They have the right to advise and consent. And when somebody is like a puppet for Assad or a puppet for Putin, if you just look at what they say, I mean, yeah, advise and consent. Still supposed to be alive and well in America.
Yeah, and that's, John, what we've been hearing a lot. We heard it from Ted Cruz yesterday. President Trump won a mandate. He's the president of the United States. He deserves to have his people put in, which totally ignores the advice and consent. Now, Ted Cruz had to be reminded that he voted against many of Joe Biden's picks to be in the cabinet.
That's a deeply shocking revelation there, Willie. I mean, this is how this works. Yes, we know that Donald Trump, yes, he won. He won by about a point and a half. Yes, Republicans have control of the Senate and the House, slim margins. They're treating this like it is a landslide, and that Trump should just, the Senate should just be a rubber stamp for whoever Trump wants. There are a few Republicans who have balked at that, at least privately, and we will see if they do so publicly with some of these picks. Mitch McConnell is one. McConnell took a fall yesterday. He says his office says he is okay. But McConnell, Collins, Murkowski are the three we talk about the most. But there are other senators who might weigh in on different picks. We talk about Joni Ernst a lot in terms of Pete Hegseth, but others have real concerns about the FBI Director, Choice Patel, and then certainly Tulsi Gabbard, Joe and Mika, who, especially with Syria front and center in the news again, many have said this is not the right woman for this moment.
Let's bring in right now MSNBC contributor Mike Barnicle, U.S. Special Correspondent for BBC News, Katty Kay, and Rogers Chair in the American Presidency at Vanderbilt University, historian John Meacham. Katty Kay, you look across the globe, especially in the Middle East, but also in Eastern Europe. Things are more fraught now than ever before, yes. Assad is gone. Yes, Iran is beaten down. There are a lot of positive signs. Of course, the Russians continue to just take massive casualties. The ruble's falling. There are a lot of great opportunities. There are also a lot of opportunities, though, for chaos that could lead to regional or world wars. The prospect, I would think, not only of people on the Hill, but also across Europe, the prospect of having somebody like Pete Hegseth or Tulsi Gabbard in two of the most important foreign policy positions in America and the world, it has to be chilling for our allies and also for many Republicans on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, the world has not got calmer since Donald Trump was elected. I think that is a fair assessment. I had a chance on Sunday night to be at an event here in Washington. There were a whole bunch of senators there, and I asked a couple of them, what they thought of Tulsi Gabbard's pick, given what had happened in Syria literally over the weekend, hours beforehand, and they kind of rolled their eyes and just, shook their heads in some kind of dismay. There are Democrats amongst them. This is going to be a challenge for them, and we don't know what more material might come out of Syria in connection with Tulsi Gabbard. Are there documents there that could be damaging to her? She is somebody who has, on several occasions, sided with the point of view of America's adversaries. She was already under scrutiny as DNI, but now I think the events in Syria have put her even further under scrutiny, and the timing of that's going to be very interesting. But you've got these other controversial picks as well. My understanding is that John Thune, the senator from North Dakota, has to think, how can I protect some of my senators? He can't have all the same senators go out and say no against all of the picks. And so he's coming up with some kind of a rotation scheme. Maybe it's Tom Tillis votes against one of them. Maybe it's Joni Ernst votes against one of them. Maybe somebody else votes against one of them. The thinking is they can probably get rid of four, and that includes Matt Gaetz. But you don't want always to have the same senator, because that opens them up to too much fury from the MAGA crowd.
And by the way, this would happen all the time in the House, where somebody would say, I cannot vote against 5 of these bills. I'll take these 2, you take those 2,
Right.
you take that 1, and there is a rotation. So when you go
That
back,
makes sense.
you go back to your district or you go back to your state, go, yeah, I voted against 1 of his elections,
Well, and these
but
people
I
have to deal
voted
with
for
Trump.
15 of them.
Yeah.
Right. So 15 out of 16, that ain't too bad. So that rotation, rotate the crops. It makes a lot of sense.
Mike Barnicle, another part of this is, of course, the actual hearings that these nominees will have to go through. And I would think that for some of these nominees, they would be especially brutal, especially Pete Hegseth, given what we know already.
You know, Mika, the Senate used to be described as the greatest deliberative body in the world. I don't think you can apply that description to the United States Senate of today, given what we're dealing with. We have a group of people, 3 people that we've just mentioned here. Character is all, as the Jesuits would say, but in these cases, competence is the issue. Look at the Middle East. Caddy was just talking about the Middle East. Is Syria on the verge of becoming a failed state, or is it a failed state already? The German government is in a state of near collapse. The French legislature has been disbanded, and they're going to have another election probably this spring. Ukraine, what's going to happen with Ukraine? All of this depends on partially at least 2 of the nominees, Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth, doing their jobs competently. They can't do their jobs competently because they're not fully qualified for those jobs, and yet they're nominated for those jobs. So it's going to be up to the Senate, the United States Senate, to stand up, advise, consent, and then vote. And we're going to find out which senators have the courage to do absolutely the right thing in defense of the United States of America.